This is called the Front Range. We're just about an hour north of Denver, and the mountains just start. So this is a 7,600-foot mountain, and then the mountains just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it was interesting to escape the grid, so to speak. It was quite affordable here originally to set up a home. The land was fairly cheap. I bought a cabin for like $60,000, a solar cabin. It immediately fell apart on me the first time I moved into it 20 years ago. So we've just been fixing it and working on it ever since. So originally there was a shop here that has the exact same shape as the roof now. And we built in a rammed earth tire wall, was the back foundation. So it was a way to get the thermal envelope pushed back, but still be able to use the original foundation that was here. It's like your easy storage shed. Down here on this foundation are layers and layers of tires set like bricks and rammed with earth. And so this is where the Passivhaus wall starts, right here. We have about 18 inches of insulation behind this. The house is a Passivhaus. Passivhaus is an international building standard that focuses on how to reduce energy consumption in a building by about 90%. And they did it by physics. Really, it wasn't developed by builders, it's developed by physicists. Everything how a building interacts with its environment, the thermodynamics of how heat transfers through materials, the way that energy is produced in the building, how solar gains come in to the building or avoided in a building. So this entire building is basically designed in a spreadsheet. So these are old water pipes from a project that failed. They were just abandoned. So we've buried them in the ground. They go behind the building in the ground for 6 to 8 feet, and then they go up to the heat recovery ventilation system. And what they do is they precondition the air when they're coming in, so they make the heat recovery a lot more energy efficient. But in the summertime, they cool the air coming in. So I can just flip to them only, so it actually trickle cools the house all through summer for free. And right now, part of the reason why the house is 71 degrees in all of the time is because we're just trickling a little bit of cool air coming from the earth, literally. It's a very simple way to do it.
So that's geothermal?
It's not really geothermal, it's really, it's called an earth tube. It's preconditioning, essentially, the air before it comes in. Where it's red was the original cabin that was here. It was about 400 square feet, and then I put an addition to it. And they share the same solar electric system. So this is a house that can only use electricity that's produced from those panels. I don't even really want to use a generator. Now we have 2 houses on a fairly small system. I figure at the most, when I have the heating system on in the house and the HRV, we're probably running maybe about 60 watts of electricity, which most people couldn't even get their house down there to that level if they turned everything off. This house is essentially a thermal battery bank, if you look at it just from a thermodynamics point of view. The wedge shape in the back and the front are very simple forms. In Passivhaus, you like to keep really simplified forms so you don't have a lot of walls on the exterior. But also the house is a wedge shape because it faces a little bit more south for passive solar. And also, if you can see, we have 3 trees, one in the back, one in the front here, and one on the side over there. And we want to wedge the house and maintain the tree canopy around the building. And the front trees actively shade in the summer and fall time. So it helps tremendously just with the raw performance. In this case, it also helped make it really interesting, give the house a lot more personality. When you come in, usually you don't want the first thing you see is the kitchen. So we had to be really careful with the kitchen and make it as simple and elemental as I could. I was really struggling with the American model of designing floor plans. I decided just to erase any labels for rooms and make it one continuous space as much as I could.
So scary. It feels like I'm gonna fall in at any moment.
So I can't remember what the record of number of people on there at one time is. I think it's about 7 kids.
So what was the idea of this? I mean, this is a lounge area?
What's that?
Oh.
It's a lounge area. It's again, it doesn't have a definition.
Can you sleep?
Yeah. But there, I haven't slept on you can nap there for sure. It depends on, your comfort threshold. It's a way to extend the living space, but also to let light in so it's not cave-like up there. So the light bounces off the floor and back into the room again, which is really neat. So that's the formal thing, but it's also freaking cool to build a net bed. I mean, who didn't want to build a net bed?
What'd you use to get it?
We just bolted it in. The idea of walls is, often counterproductive. A space like this, you have a much smaller space to work with, so every time you put a wall in, it makes a small space even smaller. So the staircase, this is used a lot in Japan, is the idea of the multi-use staircase. So this is based off those old staircases that were actually cabinets. So people get up to their attics in Japanese farmhouses. So we took that general principle, but the boxes themselves, we actually originally had it double, so there's the same number of boxes on the other side. And then I shrunk the staircase because it was just too big, but turned out I had all these boxes as a result. And this is like one step. So it was built off that basic thing. And then with all these boxes sitting around, we kept using them as furniture. So if you're just having a drink, you end up just taking the box, wherever you're at, and throw your cup on it. And then outside, using it for tables, for food, or whatever. I got totally obsessed with boxes. I need to make a lot more. Since they stack into each other, it's really nice to have them available for whenever things change. So it's around that theme of adaptability, as the building constantly adapts to whoever is using it for whatever needs are.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot of space.
Kids always inevitably run and kind of camp out in that little space. I never would have thought that would be a place for people to hang out in. So it's like a little clubhouse, I guess. That's one of the interesting discoveries about designing it really slowly and figuring those things out as we went along, by accident, really, in that sense. Okay. And this bed right here converts into a queen-size bed. So you can get 2 people to sleep in here pretty comfortably. As a kid, I always liked the smallest bedroom in the house for some reason. And I had one bedroom that was outside the house itself. It was the old stairway. This kind of reminds me of that compressedness. I think there's the idea of that huge space, that you're just overwhelming light and view. This is the opposite of that. We just flip it. But also you get the form of the building, like the space that you're in is really reinforced here. So it becomes much more about the building itself in a funny way. These are just 2x4 cedar, and it's called a nail laminated wood.
You're vertical, right?
Yeah, you can see on the side here. So I didn't even bother taking the labels off. So they're just nailed together and stacked as we build it. We put the crown standing up so it has a little bit more bounce to it. It's really quick to put together. It takes about a day to put this together. You don't have to finish the top or the bottom, it's done. Just like that.
Is this floor the ceiling below?
Exactly. And it's the wall that supports the whole thing is the same exact thing. So the nail lamb is, super simple. So we used it, again, to play with the idea of massing and the idea of woods and that contrast to give some texture. But this time it's structural. Well, against the wall, there's just cedar picket fence, just plain old cedar picket fence. It's just a facade. So here we're able to combine the facade and the structure and finishes all together in one unit. So it's like a drum, very strong, and flips up and it almost becomes like a big piece of furniture in a way. The rawness is really appealing for kind of a rural space like this. But also the richness, I just love how the space gets so much more depth. And this is another space that doesn't have a real definition right now. It's the junk drawer. These are going to be water heating and space heating.
So are you not finished with the house?
It'll never be finished. I mean, it's a self-build, so that's the nature of...
You built the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I hire people to help me, but this is self-build. I have a building background. Remember, I bought that house 20 years ago, a little cabin that broke. So I've been learning how to build just here and professionally for a number of years. But it started with just buying tools and putting things together, building systems. And I think the only way you can really do really deep design is understanding how to build it yourself physically like the plumbing and the electrical and the solar and the framing and the insulation and all those stuff. To really understand its potential, you have to know how to do it yourself. Like I'm learning all the design software now, but it puts everything together for you often. So you don't even understand what's inside the layers of a wall anymore. You just take the wall and just pluck it somewhere. And we're losing that texture and that viability understanding materials, which if you really look at closely, especially in Passivhaus, that's what drives these projects, is the understanding of how materials come together and how they function, not just individually, but as systems together. This is all insulation, so it's just a really typical 2x4 wall, and then we put plywood on the outside of the 2x4 wall, and that's our airtight layer. So we literally tape it and connect it to the roof and to the floor. Here's where the 2x4 wall is. Went from here out is about 16 inches of insulation, which is cellulose insulation. And then on the outside of that is something called mineral wool board. And the building functionally doesn't have outside air coming into it to lose heat from. You can see the triple pane windows. So we have very high-tech windows. So the spacers even are made out of low conductive material. And then the glass itself lets in lots of heat, but lets out very little heat. In the wintertime, if it's really cold outside, you can just sit right here next to the window and be perfectly comfortable in a t-shirt. And it's fantastic. So you just kick your heels up and just watch the snow, the blizzard blow by. The thing about Passivhaus is we often bury the frames inside the insulation. This is one of the hundreds of details for a Passivhaus, so you don't lose heat. It's really a death by 1,000 cuts, the way that buildings lose and gain heat. So we have to be careful about all of them. Doors are the same type of system. They're also very airtight. It's a big part of it. If I close the door right now, this building would hold temperature for this, if the sun disappeared from the sky and it got below minus 50 degrees even, this house would hold temperature for a long time. In that sense, it's a big thermos.
What do you mean a long time? Hours?
It could be days, and slowly loses heat over time, and then slowly gains heat just from the activities of the building or from the passive solar. We put in just a simple drop-down cook stove. You can easily, it's nice that it's dropped down like that, so it makes a little bit more space up here. And this is for boats, actually. It turns out that boating hardware works really good for small spaces too. We do use propane. Propane is a total must when you're living off grid. There's just certain things that you can't do well with electricity, like heating water, for instance. So to be able to heat water and to cook, you typically have propane, but we really try to minimize the amount of propane.
So this becomes a cutting board, or?
Yeah, it's a cutting board. It's made for boats. It came with it, so it's made for multiple uses. So we're just stealing somebody else's good idea. Boats are a great inspiration. I sailed for many years, so.
Materials are great.
It's just the concrete countertop. The rawness is about the landscape again. You know how when you walk out, it's rawness. You know, so inside there's a certain level of rawness too. So this is just polypropylene, greenhouse glass, double-walled stuff that you see often. And then we just made plywood boxes for it. Very simple. See what's in here?
Wow.
Yeah, so see a big theme of this house is plywood.
You weren't afraid to do a plywood floor?
Yes, I was terrified. So probably about 80% of its plywood floor. It was pretty easy to put in, 7 coats of polyurethane, and it's holding up extremely well. You know, it's plywood, so if it gets dings, it's not really a problem. It becomes a part of the character of the space. Like this piece of plywood right here, I want to show you this. This is kind of ridiculous. We saved this one slice right here. I loved the rich grain of this one. Each plywood, when you're sitting on your hands and knees all day putting this stuff in, each one has its own personality. That turned out to be my favorite piece right there. There's this beautiful tight grain to it, which is completely different from this, even though it's the same species, from the same lot. In this room is the idea of not being overwhelmed by space. Again, it's sort of like that upper space where you feel a little bit more protected from the elements. For cooling, you want one high, small window and one low, big window for cross ventilation. And it's so delightful to have a big open space to sit in front of, and that's when you can hear the winds and everything coming by. And we need the screens for the summertime, but in the wintertime, and take the screens off. It's really quite wonderful to be just kind of projected out of the space. It's a good thinking space. So as you can tell, we have the tile, kind of a heavy, dark slate tile, keeping in, tracking it from the outside inside. So one of the ideas is like if you have to use the restroom, you don't have to take your shoes off. And then the restroom takes the tile theme. So if you start with these tiles, these are 16 by 16s. So you have this big scale, and then you drop to these 6 by 6s as you come in, and it kind of transitions from wall to this gray space. And then we go from the 6 by 6 to the 4 by 4, which is even more intimate space. And then finally we end with these little 2 by 2 tiles. So we were just playing very subtly with the idea of scale. So I almost want the tiles to disappear. When we were putting the tile on, there's this big bump in the tile right here. So I had to put something on there just to cover up that boo-boo. So I ended up putting this rack. And I was thinking about the idea of play was to have kids have holes in there, sort of pegs that they could make just playing with. So I may take it down and finish that idea. So this is the ventilation. So this is a wet room. So wherever my pollution sources are in a passive house, you take it from where you have pollution. So this is extracting the stale air from the building, putting it outside. This is a reflection of the kitchen area right here. I just left all the markings. It's almost like an ode to me never finishing anything. This house is very much about the place it's in, and very much about the very specifics of sitting here on this particular piece of land. You're kind of inside and outside the building right here in a way, aren't you? Yeah, and the window heights were designed, of course, just to be comfortable to sit in. So it's de facto furniture. I often use the windowsills as a desk. So you can tell the landscape keeps changing. That tree in front of us is dying for some reason. So next year, it'll be mostly just naked branches. And then beyond that, that streak of green at the top of the mountain, that was a fire that happened in 1999, burned about 10,000 acres. So this land is very much in flux. So it's a big roof. I have 2 downspouts on it. This is a sediment filter right here. And then it goes into this little pipe and down into a tank that's underneath the deck there. That's about 1,500 gallons. It's by law in Australia, you have to put a water catchment system in. In Colorado, by law, you can't put one in.
So this is illegal?
When I originally put it in, it was illegal. And then it became legal afterwards. So it's a huge disappointment to think that things are moving so slowly in a high desert region where water is one of our most difficult resources to manage, that we can't even do simple things like capture our own water. These are logs that were cut right here when we had to place the building. So we just peeled them and used them for supports. This is just a big bench. It's the nap space. This is, where you end up spending many lazy afternoons. This space is designed to project you out and back into the forest again, but in a protected sense. And what's best about this space is that there is no Wi-Fi on this corner. So there's a lot of people who come up, move into the mountains and last for a few years, and then they said, well, they would say it's too far from the city or something like that, and they move back. And it's really not about the city, it's really having to be with yourself. So you have to really know yourself to be out here for any length of time. My wife always compared it to, the Walden Pond, the Thoreau-esque kind of quality, but I think that's oversimplifying. The fact is that it's not just your relationship with yourself, but it's your relationship with a landscape that's really important. So understanding what a forest is a really complex living organism. And if you turn around, you'll see some trees on the ground. Those just got knocked over in a snow 2 months ago. So this forest is very dynamic, changing place. Even just understanding that has a lot of positive impacts on just the way of being in the world and seeing the world.